Throughout the Halo series, we received a great amount of knowledge in regards to the Old Covenant Empire, but some obscure pieces of lore have been largely overlooked or otherwise forgotten in the larger community, even to myself. Some may be trivial, others more significant, but to me, they're all interesting. So in light of this, I've compiled a list of Covenant trivia that doesn't necessarily warrant their own videos, but I find them interesting enough that they should be addressed. But for the record, this is only about the original Covenant. Post-war splinter groups and remnant factions will be addressed in a later video. So here's 10 facts you didn't know about the Covenant. Number 1. Sangheili was the official language of the Covenant. In Halo Reach and Halo 4, instead of speaking in typical English like from other installments, we hear the Covenant AIs speak in a particularly strange alien language. This is, in fact, the official Sangheili tongue. Following the end of the war that brought about the formation of the Covenant in 850 BCE, one of the terms of the Writ of Union was for the Sangheili language to be incorporated into the new Covenant, given that the Sangheili population was greater than the Sanshayums. The prophets accommodated this, and for 3,000 years, the official language of the Covenant, its scriptures, its text, were in fact Sangheili. The text may have evolved over the years, but still Sangheili. And every species that joined the Covenant had to speak the Sangheili tongue. Number 2. The Covenant had other holy worlds other than High Charity. High Charity was considered the most sacred site within the entire Covenant. It was the center of governance, faith, and was the adopted homeworld of the Sanshayum. This may surprise some of you, but High Charity wasn't the only sacred place in the Covenant. Worlds deep in Covenant space had rich deposits of Forerunner artifacts and holy sites, and thus became home to thousands of artisans, engineers, and pilgrims. They considered these planets sacred and holy. Some even established heavy military presence in the event of any surprise attacks. One such attack came on the holy world of Zoist, which was close to human space and was ravaged by a UNSC surprise attack in the early years of the Covenant War. What became of these worlds after the Covenant fell apart? No one knows, but it's likely that, like many other Covenant colonies, they fell into infighting and many civil wars over holy sites and sacred artifacts that brought them closer to their gods. Number 3. High Charity had a mayor. As I said, High Charity was the center of government, home to the High Prophets and to the High Council. But who manages the day-to-day affairs of an entire city while the Council governs an empire? Well, it turns out that the station city has a mayor of sorts, a prelate of High Charity, not to be confused with the warrior class prelates, the Covenant equivalent to the Spartans. My best assumption is that the prelate of High Charity functioned like any other mayor would. Law enforcement, city policy, enforcing the will of the prophets, that sort of thing. The only Sanshayum that held that title was the Prophet of Restraint before becoming a hierarch. In fact, he was one of the 3 hierarchs who preceded Truth, Mercy, and Regret before the Covenant War. Which brings me to my next fact. Number 4. The Covenant had a female hierarch before the Covenant War. I kid you not. One of the hierarchs that came before Truth, Mercy, and Regret was a woman, the Prophetess of Obligation. It seems like this hierarch was very beloved by the Covenant, but like every other Sanshayum, her title is very ironic, as she gave birth to triplets and spent most of her time with her children rather than upholding her duty as a hierarch. This is very interesting because aside from the Kigyar, the Covenant has been very patriarchal for the most part. But apparently in Sangheili culture, females can rise to political status just like males can, even ascending to the highest political and religious position in the entire Covenant. Even Truth, known as the Minister of Fortitude at the time, he said that there were numerous other female hierarchs, but Obligation was the only one named thus far. It surprises me that 343 hasn't expanded this idea, because now I really want to know what other female hierarchs were before Obligation. Fingers crossed for another Covenant book. I really want to know more about this. Number 5. The Covenant had a currency. As we fought the Covenant throughout the original saga, as they invaded and glassed planets, we forget that they're more than just invaders. They were a civilization just like any other, and like any civilization, they had an economy to keep their alliance afloat. And in the Covenant, their economy was based on Gex. They were paid just like how UEG credits were, and even how money is paid now. They can come in physical tokens, like dimes, nickels, and quarters, or can be wired electronically. Gex were normally stored in a single treasury system, just like how we store our money in banks. And I assume this is how the government paid for starships and weapons of war. They're probably also used to pay off the Kigyar mercenaries and privateers that they hire into their service. They were so popular that even after its dissolution, warring Covenant splinter groups continued to pay mercs and armories with Gex. I guess that even in the Covenant, money makes the world go round. Number 6. Sangheili was the original capital of the Covenant before High Charity. When people think about the center of the Covenant, they all point to High Charity, the great city-station of the Covenant, the capital of a great empire. But it wasn't always like this. Back when the Covenant was still being founded after the war beginnings, and when the Dreadnought was being decommissioned, it was the Sangheili homeworld that served as the de facto capital of the Covenant, while High Charity was still being constructed high in orbit. I know that in Broken Circle, the hierarchs usually reside themselves within the Dreadnought while it's being decommissioned. But I can't help but wonder that perhaps some prophets came to local Sangheili clans on Sangheili, probably to help spread the word of the great journey to other like-minded Sangheili, or probably other impressionable youths. Like I said, I would love to see another book detailing Covenant history, and I would love to know what Sangheili was like while High Charity was still being constructed. But only time will tell, I guess. Number 7. The Mantle of Responsibility was part of the Covenant faith. As strange as it happens, the Covenant were aware of the Forerunner Mantle of Responsibility. For those of you unaware, the Mantle is a mandate to protect all life in the galaxy, or as Master Chief called it in Halo 5, an Imperial Peace. This was something that the Forerunners revered to a near religious degree, holding it so tight that they trusted it to no one, save the librarian who thought humans were worthy of the mantle. But like so many other things regarding the Forerunners, the Covenant misinterpreted and saw it as a divine right to conquer and dominate the galaxy. This was possibly founded that if they dominate the galaxy, they could find Halo and begin the great journey faster and join their gods in paradise. Number 8. The Covenant had its own founding fathers. As the war dragged on between the elites and the prophets in 850 BCE, both sides suffered great losses and were at a mere standstill, and by the end of the conflict, they were both willing to negotiate a truce. And so Pelasar the Strident of the Sangheili and the Sangheili leader Breaking Shadow met and were willing to set aside past crimes in order to form a truce. This truce would eventually evolve into the Writ of Union and would lead to the formation of the Covenant. This would, in effect, make Pelasar and Breaking Shadow the founding fathers of the Covenant. No doubt in the 3,000 years of history in the Covenant, Palisar and Breaking Shadow are probably known as great leaders, willing to set aside their past hatreds for one another in order to build a better future for their people, and also building an empire that would last for nearly 3,000 years and unite many species by a joint faith. A faith built on lies, yes, but a faith nonetheless. Number 9. The Sharqui were part of the Covenant. Sort of. You longtime veteran Halo fans remember the Sharqui, right? The giant hulking beast that even dwarfs hunters? The ones that were meant to be mini-bosses in Halo Combat Evolve, but were cut out? Well, as it turns out, they were part of the Covenant, but not as large as you may think. The Covenant discovered and inducted a very limited number of them in combat, but since they only had a limited population, and they were very hard to control, their existence was kept largely a secret from the other members of the Covenant. And since the fall of the Covenant, they've been hunted down by human and Sangheili forces, and at least 2 hives of Sharqui have thus been lost. Whatever role they'll play in Halo media is yet to be determined. I hope to see them again in a future Halo game, but I'm not gonna give my hopes up. And at number 10, there was a flood worshipping cult within the Covenant. Yes, you heard me correctly. Within the Covenant, there was a cult that literally praised the flood. These guys were known as the Governors of Contrition. They believed that all Forerunner creations were sacred. This included the flood. They thought the parasite was a perfect life form and must be protected and even embraced according to their messed up ideology. Yeah, wacko. And yet, despite being crazed maniacs, the Covenant accepted the Governors into regular society and even into their military. One of their members, Tano Enarari, was a shipmaster of a heavy cruiser, the Incorruptible, by the time of the Great Schism. And this elite was as insane as his cult, for he wanted to expose his ship to the flood on Delta Halo, while the Covenant was tearing itself apart. He may have succeeded in that, had his lieutenant Voro Montegri not kill him. I'm really curious that the Prophets even allowed such a radical ideology as the Governors to exist within the Covenant faith, though I wonder if they had some sort of sway in the political arenas in High Charity, or within the armed forces to be a splinter sect of the Covenant faith. Or maybe there are some influential prophets who do support the Governors. That could explain why these radicals haven't been excommunicated by the Covenant. Either way, this cult is both fascinating and crazy as hell. So there you have it. That is my 10 facts you probably don't know about the Covenant. What'd you think of this list? Was it insightful? Do you think there were other things that I could have gone over? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like and subscribe button. Until next we meet again, in Orus's everlasting light.